The fluorescent lights of the Juniper Crossings Community Center multipurpose room cast a sterile, greenish pallor on the proceedings. It was a light that flattered no one, least of all the three members of the Architectural Control Committee seated behind a folding table. Trevor Hanley stood before them, his posture calm, his voice even. On the table lay a neatly rendered schematic, printed on architectural vellum, detailing his proposed garden bed. "As you can see," Trevor said, gesturing with a pen, "the structure is a simple raised bed, 12 feet long by 4 feet wide, constructed from untreated cedar. It will sit entirely within my property line. Here." He tapped the dotted line on the drawing, "and will be planted with a mix of perennial herbs and seasonal vegetables. It's designed to be tasteful and unobtrusive." He had prepared for this. He had read the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, the bylaws, and the community's architectural standards guide. He had filled out Form 4B7 application for minor landscaping alteration. In triplicate, he was a software architect by trade, a man who built his career on logic, process, and documentation. He believed in doing things the right way. Nancy Drebach, president of the HOA board and de facto ruler of the ACC, did not look at his schematic. Her eyes, framed by tightly pulled back blonde hair, were fixed on him. She wore a pristine white tennis skirt and a matching visor, as if she had just come from a vigorous match, though Trevor had never once seen her on the community courts. "Mr. Hanley," she began, her voice a carefully modulated instrument of polite condescension. She picked up his application with 2 fingers, holding it as if it were contaminated. "We have reviewed your submission." Trevor knew this was a lie. He had submitted it 72 hours ago, and the packet had remained sealed on the check-in table until he himself had opened it moments before his presentation. Nancy continued, a thin smile playing on her lips. "The committee finds the proposal inconsistent with the established aesthetic of the community." One of her 2 cronies, a woman named Carol, who seemed to model her entire personality on Nancy's, nodded vigorously. The other, a quiet man named Frank, stared intently at a water stain on the ceiling. "Could you be more specific?" Trevor asked, keeping his tone professional. "Which section of the architectural standards does it violate?" Nancy let out a small, airy laugh. It was a sound designed to dismiss, to belittle. "It's not about a specific rule, Mr. Hanley. It's about the overall character, the spirit of the community. We are not a neighborhood of vegetable patches and personal projects." She slid the application back across the table toward him. "The request is denied." A faint flush crept up Trevor's neck. The public dismissal stung more than he expected. He had followed every procedure to the letter, and his reward was to be publicly admonished, as if he'd proposed installing a junkyard on his front lawn. "I see," he said, gathering his papers with deliberate, steady hands. He refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing him flustered. He had come to Juniper Crossings for peace, and he would not let this woman, with her vanity license plate reading HOBOS, rob him of it. As he turned to leave, her voice followed him, carrying clearly through the quiet room. "We maintain our property values by maintaining standards. Mr. Hanley, I'm sure you understand." It was not a statement. It was a threat, wrapped in the sterile language of governance. The war had begun, not with a bang, but with the rustle of a denied application form. Trevor Hanley had bought the house on Tulip Circle 3 years ago as an escape. He was escaping the relentless grind of Silicon Valley, where he'd spent 15 years building a successful but soul-crushing career. He'd been a lead architect at a major tech firm, a job that paid handsomely but demanded his every waking hour. The burnout had been a slow, creeping fog, until one day he realized he hadn't had a genuine, non-work-related thought in 6 months. He sold his overpriced condo, cashed out a mountain of stock options, and sought refuge in a place where the loudest sound was a distant lawnmower. Juniper Crossings, with its mature oak trees and quiet, curving streets, seemed perfect. It was a well-established suburb, solid and unpretentious. The house he bought was a 1990s brick colonial with good bones, a large backyard, and, most importantly, a sense of permanence. This house was his sanctuary, a place to decompress, to rediscover the person he was before his job consumed him. He took up baking bread. He learned the names of the birds that visited his feeder. He spent hours meticulously caring for his lawn and flower beds, finding a deep, quiet satisfaction in the tangible results of his labor. The garden bed was the next logical step in his recovery. It was a project born of a desire to create something real, something he could nurture from seed to harvest. It was a symbol of putting down roots, both literally and figuratively. "She can't just do that," said his sister, Sarah, her voice crackling over his phone's speaker. He was sitting on his back patio, watching the evening sun filter through the leaves of his large oak tree. "Apparently, she can," Trevor replied, swirling the ice in his glass of water. "She's the board president. She didn't even cite a rule, just the spirit of the community." Sarah was a lawyer in Chicago, pragmatic and sharp-tongued. She had little patience for the arbitrary whims of petty tyrants. "No, she can't. The board's authority is strictly defined by the governing documents. If it's not in the CC&Rs or the bylaws, her opinion is legally irrelevant." "Did you check the docs for anything about vegetable gardens?" "Exhaustively," Trevor said. "There's nothing. The Architectural Standards Guide mentions maintaining a neat and orderly appearance, and requires approval for structural alterations, which is why I submitted the plan in the first place. I wanted to be above reproach." "Her mistake," Sarah said. "She thinks you're like everyone else, that you'll just roll over. What are you going to do?" Trevor watched a cardinal land on his fence. He was, by nature, non-confrontational. His first instinct was always to de-escalate, to find a compromise. It was a trait that had served him well in corporate boardrooms, but felt like a liability now. "I don't know. Part of me wants to just let it go. It's just a garden bed." "It's not just a garden bed, Trev," his sister cut in. "It's your house, your property. You moved there to get away from people telling you how to live your life. Are you really going to let a woman in a tennis skirt dictate what you can and can't plant in your own backyard?" He knew she was right. This wasn't about vegetables. It was about the principle. It was about defending the very peace he had come here to find. If he capitulated now, where would it end? Fines for the wrong color of welcome mat, citations for having too many squirrels in his oak tree. He had seen the whispers on the neighborhood Facebook group about Nancy Driebach's overreach. He had dismissed them as typical community grumbling. Now, he was the target. "You're right," he said, his voice hardening with resolve. "I'm building it." "Good," Sarah said. "Build it exactly to the specifications you submitted. Document everything. Take photos before, during, and after. If she wants a war of procedure, you make sure your procedure is flawless." His resolve solidified. He was a man of logic and rules. Nancy Driebach had just picked a fight with the wrong homeowner. He would build his garden, and he would do it so perfectly by the book that she would have no legitimate grounds to stand on. He was certain of it. The following Saturday, Trevor built the garden bed. He followed his own schematic with meticulous precision. He measured every cut twice. He ensured every corner was a perfect 90-degree angle. He used a level to make certain the structure was flawlessly horizontal. It was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, a testament to his careful planning. It sat a full 24 inches inside his property line, nestled in a sunny spot near his back patio. He filled it with a rich mixture of organic soil and compost, and planted neat rows of tomato seedlings, basil, and rosemary. For 10 days, there was silence. Trevor tended his small garden, watering the seedlings and pulling the first errant weeds. He felt a quiet thrill of defiance every time he looked at it. He had asserted his rights as a homeowner, calmly and reasonably. Perhaps Nancy had decided to let it go. On the morning of May 1st, he found it. Tucked under his doormat was a simple, nondescript white envelope with no stamp or return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, printed on the official Juniper Crossings HOA letterhead. Courtesy Notice. Date: May 1, 2023. To homeowner, 114 Tulip Circle. From Juniper Crossings HOA Compliance Committee. It has come to our attention that an unapproved structure garden bed has been erected on your property. As you are aware, your application for this alteration was denied by the Architectural Control Committee. This structure is in violation of community standards. Please arrange for its voluntary removal within 14 days of the date of this notice to avoid further action. Thank you for your cooperation in maintaining the beauty and value of our community. The notice was unsigned. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of an anonymous, threatening letter. The politeness of the language, courtesy notice. Voluntary removal. Thank you for your cooperation only amplified its passive-aggressive menace. The war he had anticipated had officially been declared. Trevor refused to be intimidated. He drafted a polite, formal letter to the board, referencing his original application and respectfully requesting the specific CC&R or bylaw his garden bed violated. He sent it via certified mail. He received no reply. The 14-day deadline passed. On the morning of May 16th, the mail carrier knocked on his door with a certified letter that required his signature. Trevor signed the green slip, a knot tightening in his stomach. The envelope contained a document far more severe than the first. Formal notice of violation. Tracking YGG 7018 3090 DUJU 14598821. Date: May 15, 2023. To Trevor Hanley, 114 Tulip Circle. From Juniper Crossings HOA Board of Directors. Uncured violation. Unauthorized structure. This letter serves as a formal notice of a continuing violation of the Juniper Crossings covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs. The unapproved structure garden bed noted in the courtesy notice of May 1, 2023, has not been removed. This structure is in violation of CC&R, Rule 8.4.2, unauthorized alterations to common area views. Pursuant to the authority granted to the board in the community bylaws, a fine of 100 Zabruslers is hereby levied against your account. This fine is due within 30 days. You have the right to request a formal hearing before the board to contest this violation and fine. Your request for a hearing must be submitted in writing within 10 days of receipt of this notice. Failure to remedy the violation or request a hearing will result in further enforcement action. Sincerely, the Board of Directors, Juniper Crossings, HOA. Trevor's eyes fixed on the citation CC&R, Fargo 8.4.2, unauthorized alterations to common area views. He immediately pulled out his thick binder containing the HOA governing documents and flipped to the section. He read the clause carefully. Fargo 8.4.2, view corridor easements. No structure, planting, or other material shall be placed or permitted to remain upon any of the hillside lots, which may damage or interfere with any easement for the installation or maintenance of utilities, or which may unreasonably change, obstruct, or retard the view from any other lot. He read it again. Hillside lots. His house was on Tulip Circle, a perfectly flat cul-de-sac at the lowest elevation in the entire development. The hillside lots were a specific section on the other side of the neighborhood, prized for their views over the adjacent nature preserve. The clause was utterly, demonstrably inapplicable to his property. This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate misapplication of the rules. Nancy was inventing a violation out of thin air, banking on the assumption that he wouldn't read the fine print. He immediately submitted a written request for a hearing. He would present his case logically, point out the clear text of the CC&Rs, and this whole absurd affair would be over. The hearing was scheduled for the next monthly board meeting on June 1st. Trevor arrived prepared, with his copy of the CC&Rs, a photograph of his garden bed, and a map of the neighborhood clearly delineating the hillside lots from the rest of the community. When his turn came, he laid out his case with the calm precision of a software architect debugging a flawed system. He presented the violation notice. He read Rubber 8.4.2 aloud. He then displayed the community map. As you can see, he concluded, my property, Lot 72, is not designated as a hillside lot. Therefore, this section of the CC&Rs does not apply. I respectfully request that the violation be dismissed and the fine rescinded. He sat down, confident that logic and fact would prevail. Nancy Drebach listened to his entire presentation without expression. When he finished, she did not look at him. She looked at her fellow board members, Frank and Carol. The board has broad authority to interpret the CC&Rs in a manner that protects the general welfare and aesthetic of the community, she stated, as if reading from a script. It is the board's interpretation that the principle of protecting views applies to the entire community, not just the designated hillside lots. The spirit of the rule is what matters. The plain language of the contract is what matters, Trevor countered, trying to keep the incredulity from his voice. You can't enforce the spirit of a rule against its explicit text. Your point is noted, Mr. Hanley, Nancy said dismissively. The board will now vote on the appeal. She looked at Carol. All in favor of upholding the violation. Nancy's hand shot up. Carol's followed a second later. Frank, the quiet man, hesitated. He looked at Trevor, then at Nancy. A flicker of discomfort crossed his face before he slowly, reluctantly, raised his hand. The vote is 3-0, Nancy announced, a triumphant glint in her eye. The appeal is denied. The violation and the fine stand. You have 30 days to remit payment and remove the structure. Trevor sat stunned. It was a kangaroo court. The system was not just flawed. It was explicitly, openly rigged. He had walked in with an unassailable argument based on their own founding documents and had been defeated by a 3-person dictatorship. He had played by the rules, but the person running the game was changing them at will. The system he had trusted to be fair was nothing more than a weapon in Nancy Drebach's hands. The next morning, the sting of injustice had sharpened into cold resolve. Trevor's approach shifted. He was no longer on defense, appealing to a corrupt system. He was going on offense. He was going to dismantle Nancy Drebach's authority using the very tools she was abusing: procedure and paperwork. His first call was to Sarah. They voted against the plain text of the CC&Rs. He explained, pacing his kitchen, it was a sham. Okay, so appealing to the board is useless. They're a monolith, Sarah said. Now you pivot to discovery. You need more information. The governing documents give every homeowner the right to inspect the association's records. You're going to submit a formal records request. Be specific. You want the board meeting minutes for the last 2 years, all signed contracts with outside vendors, and the detailed financial statements. What am I looking for? A pattern, inconsistency, anything that shows she's not applying the rules evenly. Or better yet, a financial motive. People like this are rarely just on a power trip. There's usually money involved somewhere. Following Sarah's advice, Trevor drafted a formal records request citing the relevant state statute and the HOA's own bylaws. He sent it via certified mail to the HOA's management company, ensuring there was an official record of his request. While he waited for the HOA to comply, they had 10 business days by law. He turned his attention to the foundation of the dispute, the property itself. The CC&Rs were one thing, but the official, legally binding description of his property was recorded with the county. He drove downtown to the county recorder's office, a formidable granite building that smelled of old paper and bureaucratic permanence. He found the experience surprisingly archaic. After navigating a confusing series of counters, he was directed to a dusty room filled with heavy ledger books and microfilm readers. It was here he met Mr. Gable. Arthur Gable was a quiet widower in his late 70s who lived a few streets over from Trevor. He had a magnificent garden of his own, filled with prize-winning roses that were the talk of the neighborhood. Trevor recognized him from his walks. Mr. Gable was in the records office tracking the genealogy of his own property, a personal hobby. He saw Trevor struggling with the microfilm reader and offered a kindly hand. "Looking for something specific?" Mr. Gable asked, his voice soft. Trevor, frustrated by the process, found himself explaining the entire situation: the garden bed, the nonsensical violation, the citation of a view corridor easement. A spark of interest lit up Mr. Gable's eyes. "An easement. You say I was a title clerk here for 40 years before I retired. An easement is a creature of paper. My boy, it's a legal encumbrance. It cannot simply be declared. It must be recorded. It must live on the official plat map, or for all legal purposes. It does not exist." Over the next hour, Mr. Gable became his guide, his Yoda of public records. He showed Trevor how to look up his parcel number and locate the original plat map for the Juniper Crossings development, filed back in 1988. He helped Trevor pull the massive, linen-backed drawing from a flat file drawer and unroll it on a large table. The plat map was a dense web of lines, numbers, and legal descriptions. Mr. Gable's experienced finger traced the lines of the development, finally landing on Lot 72 Tulip Circle. "There you are," he said. He handed Trevor a magnifying glass. "Now look closely at your property lines. See how they are clean, solid, and unbroken. If there were an easement of any kind, utility, drainage, view, whatever it would be, explicitly marked with a dashed line and a notation right here." Trevor looked, his heart pounding. The lines were clean. There was no mention of an easement. Nothing. "So it's not there," Trevor said, a sense of vindication washing over him. "It has never been there," Mr. Gable corrected. "This is the master document, the legal blueprint. The map in the HOA's sales brochure is just a cartoon by comparison. This is the truth." A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived from the HOA management company. It contained a stack of meeting minutes. As Trevor began to read through them, he noticed something odd. The minutes were inconsistent. Some meetings were detailed. Others were summarized in a few vague sentences. Then he found it, in the minutes from a meeting 6 months prior. Dated December 5th, 2022, he saw a suspicious entry. "Motion to approve landscape remediation contract with Vertiscapes LLC for common area easement maintenance. Discussion. Redacted per attorney-client privilege. Vote passed 3-0. Redacted. Why would a discussion about a landscaping contract be privileged, and the name? Vertiscapes LLC. Rang a distant bell. Trevor did a quick search on the state's online business registry. He found the company's registration documents. The owner and registered agent was listed as one Martin O'Connell. The name meant nothing to him. He was about to close the window when he noticed the address listed for the business. It was the same address as the HOA's own management company. That was strange, but not necessarily a smoking gun. He filed the information away. The pieces were beginning to connect, forming the outline of a puzzle he couldn't yet see in its entirety. But the central, undeniable fact was the plat map. Nancy wasn't just misinterpreting a rule. She was knowingly enforcing a rule based on a legal fiction. The question was no longer if she was wrong, but why she was targeting him with such a blatant fabrication. Trevor met Mr. Gable for coffee the next morning, bringing a copy of the plat map and the redacted minutes. He laid them out on the small table between them. "This is it," Trevor said, tapping the plat map. "You were right. No easement." Mr. Gable nodded, peering at the document over his spectacles. "As I suspected. A claim without a foundation." "But look at this," Trevor said, pushing the redacted minutes across the table. She passed a motion to award a contract to a company called Vertiscapes for easement maintenance. How can you maintain something that doesn't exist? Mr. Gable read the entry, his brow furrowing. Vertiscapes. That name sounds familiar. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes distant in thought. My wife, before she passed, was on the social committee. She kept all the old neighborhood newsletters. Nancy's predecessor used to include a neighbor spotlight section. The old man's mind was making a connection that Trevor couldn't see. What about it? Nancy's maiden name. It wasn't Drebach. It was O'Connell. The name clicked into place. Martin O'Connell, registered agent for Vertiscapes LLC. Her brother or husband? Trevor asked, his voice low. Brother-in-law, if I recall, Mr. Gable said, his gaze sharp. Married to her younger sister, a landscaper, always trying to get the HOA contract when the old board was in charge. But his bids were always too high. The entire conspiracy snapped into focus, stark and ugly. Nancy wasn't just misapplying a rule. She had invented a violation on Trevor's property to create a pretext. She needed an easement that required remediation. Removing his garden bed would be the first phase of this phantom project, a project for which she had already awarded a contract to her own family member. The redacted discussion was almost certainly about the details of this fraudulent scheme. She hadn't targeted him because she disliked his garden. She had targeted him because his property was the perfect location to establish the precedent for her grift. His quiet, non-confrontational nature probably made him seem like the ideal victim. The fight was no longer about a simple garden bed or an unjust fine. It was about exposing deliberate, calculated corruption. Nancy Drebach wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a crook, using the machinery of the HOA for personal enrichment, and Trevor Hanley, the man who had moved here for peace and quiet, was now the only person who had the evidence to prove it. Nancy must have sensed that Trevor was digging, because the harassment escalated from bureaucratic to personal. On July 1st, another certified letter arrived. This one was from a law firm, printed on heavy, intimidating bond paper. Official notice of intent to lien. Re-delinquent account, 1 Victor 14 Tulip Circle, APN 481-59237. Dear Mr. Hanley, This firm represents the Juniper Crossings Homeowners Association. Our records indicate that your account is delinquent in the amount of $1,075.0, comprising an initial fine of $100 and accruing daily fines of $25 for a continuing violation, CCNR 508.4.2, from June 2, 2023 to the present date. Demand is hereby made for the full payment of $1,075.0 within 30 days of the date of this letter. Failure to remit payment in full will result in the HOA recording a lien against your property. Please be advised that the recording of a lien may constitute a default under the terms of your mortgage, potentially triggering an acceleration clause and foreclosure proceedings. Govern yourself accordingly. The words leaped off the page: lien, default, foreclosure. This was the nuclear option. A lien on his property would shatter his credit rating and could, in a worst-case scenario, threaten his ownership of the home. The pressure was no longer abstract. It was a direct threat to his financial stability and the sanctuary he had worked so hard to build. Simultaneously, a more visible form of harassment began. Nancy's son, Tanner, a listless man in his early 20s who seemed to have no occupation other than serving as his mother's enforcer, began a campaign of low-grade surveillance. He never trespassed again, but his presence was a constant, unnerving pressure. He would park his ostentatious, lifted pickup truck on the public street directly in front of Trevor's house for hours at a time. He would stand on the sidewalk, just beyond the property line, and openly film Trevor's house with his phone. One afternoon, Trevor looked out his window to see Tanner on his hands and knees on the public easement strip between the sidewalk and the street, meticulously measuring the height of Trevor's lawn with a ruler. The microaggressions were designed to be unsettling, but to remain just on the legal side of harassment. They were a clear message from Nancy: I am watching. I can make your life miserable. Give up. The pressure was immense. Trevor felt his hard-won peace eroding, replaced by a constant state of anxiety. He second-guessed every noise outside his house. His phone conversations with Sarah became more frequent, more urgent. This is what they do, Trev, she told him one night as he described Tanner's latest antics. They want to exhaust you. They want to make the cost of fighting higher than the cost of surrendering. Don't let them. Stick to the plan. You have the facts. You have the documents. You just need the right forum to present them. The right forum was coming. The notice for the annual homeowners meeting had arrived in the mail. It was scheduled for July 15th. It was the one meeting Nancy couldn't completely control, where every homeowner had a right to speak during the public comment period. Trevor sent an email to the management company, formally registering for his 5-minute public comment slot. His plan was set. He would not fight Nancy in the shadows or through angry letters. He would expose her in the open, in front of the entire community she claimed to be protecting. The day before the meeting, Nancy made her final move. She approached him as he was getting his mail. Her demeanor was completely changed. Gone was the imperious board president. In her place was a woman radiating concerned sincerity. "Trevor," she said, using his first name for the first time, "can we talk for a second, off the record?" He eyed her warily. "What about—" "I know we've had our disagreements," she said, her voice soft, "but I think this has all gone too far. It's not good for the community." She paused, as if gathering her courage. "Listen, I know you're worried about Mrs. Diaz down the street. I've seen you helping her with her recycling bins. She's on a fixed income, and frankly, the fines she's accumulated for her bird feeder are substantial. Over $800. Trevor knew all about it. Nancy had been fining the sweet, elderly woman for months, claiming the bird seed on the ground constituted yard debris. "Here's my offer," Nancy said, moving closer. "You drop this whole thing. Withdraw your request to speak at the meeting tomorrow. Just let it go. And I will personally see to it that every fine against Mrs. Diaz's account is erased. We can wipe her slate clean. But it has to be our secret. It's a win-win. You get your peace back, and a poor old woman gets out from under a crushing debt." There it was, the secondary moral twist. She was offering him an easy way out that would also help someone he cared about. All he had to do was stay silent. He could have his garden, his peace, and be a hero to his neighbor. The alternative was a public, ugly fight with no guarantee of victory. He looked at Nancy's face, at the calculated sincerity in her eyes. She thought she had found his price. "I'll think about it," Trevor said, his voice betraying no emotion. He walked back into his house, her offer hanging in the air. He now had to choose between a quiet, personal victory that would save Mrs. Diaz, or a loud, public battle for justice that would save everyone, but risked leaving the kind old woman to her fate if he failed. The multi-purpose room was packed for the annual meeting, the air thick with a mixture of civic duty and simmering resentment. More than 60 homeowners were present, a far cry from the usual dozen who attended the monthly board meetings. Word had spread. Something was going to happen. Nancy Drabach sat at the head table, flanked by her board, looking composed and in control. Behind her, a large projection screen displayed the meeting agenda. At the bottom of the agenda was the item Homeowner Open Forum 5-minute limit per speaker. A large digital timer was projected in the corner of the screen, 05:00. Trevor sat in the third row, his laptop bag resting at his feet. His heart hammered against his ribs. But his hands were steady. He had spent the previous night preparing, creating a simple, clean slide deck. He had rehearsed his speech until the words were second nature. He had made his choice. Nancy ran through the first part of the meeting with brisk efficiency: the treasurer's report, the landscaping committee update. She used parliamentary procedure like a weapon, cutting off questions with a sharp, "That is not germane to the current motion." Finally, she arrived at the open forum. "The floor is now open for homeowner comments," she announced. "First on the list is Trevor Hanley." A murmur went through the crowd. Trevor stood and walked to the podium at the front of the room. He calmly connected his laptop to the projector. Nancy's thin smile was fixed in place, but he could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She didn't know which choice he had made. "Good evening," Trevor began, his voice amplified by the microphone. The timer on the screen started its inexorable countdown: 04, 59, 04, 58. "My name is Trevor Hanley, and I live at 114 Tulip Circle. For the past 6 weeks, I have been in a dispute with the board over a small garden bed I built in my backyard. This dispute has resulted in over $1,000 in fines and a threat of a lien against my home. The board has maintained that my garden bed violates CC&R Section 8.4.2. He clicked the remote, and his first slide appeared on the screen. It was a clean, text-based slide showing the exact wording of the rule. CC&R, RER 8.4.2, view corridor easements. No structure, planting, or other material shall be placed or permitted to remain upon any of the hillside lots. As you can see, Trevor said, using a laser pointer to highlight the key phrase, this rule explicitly applies only to the hillside lots. I live on Tulip Circle. My property is not a hillside lot. To be sure, I have a question for everyone here tonight. By a show of hands, how many of us live on one of the designated hillside lots? He scanned the room. Not a single hand went up. The timer read 03:55. And yet, Trevor continued, the board, in its official capacity, has chosen to enforce this rule against my property, claiming they have the authority to interpret the spirit of the rule. But a contract is not about spirit. It's about language. And this language is perfectly clear. He clicked to the next slide. It was a dramatic, side-by-side comparison. On the left was the colorful, simplified map from the HOA's promotional materials. On the right was the stark, black and white, official county plat map he and Mr. Gable had uncovered. This is why the language is so clear. On the left is the map the HOA shows us. On the right is the legally binding plat map on file with the county. I've highlighted my lot, Lot 72, with the laser pointer. He traced his clean, unbroken property lines. As you can see, there is no view corridor easement recorded on my property. It does not exist. The board has been fining me and threatening to place a lien on my home, based on a legal fiction. The murmurs in the room grew louder. People were leaning forward in their seats, looking from the screen to Nancy, whose face had become a rigid mask. The timer read, Yo 2:30. This raises a question, Trevor said, his voice dropping slightly. Why? Why would the board go to such lengths to enforce a non-existent rule against a homeowner? I believe the answer may be found in the meeting minutes. He advanced to the third slide. It showed the redacted entry from the December 5th meeting. Motion to approve landscape remediation contract with Vertiscapes LLC for common area easement maintenance. Discussion. Redacted per attorney-client privilege. The board approved a contract with a company called Vertiscapes to perform easement maintenance. But as we've established, at least on my part of the property, there is no easement to maintain. So why the contract? And why was the discussion redacted? The timer showed 01:15. This was the moment. I did a little research into Vertiscapes LLC. His final slide appeared. It was a screenshot from the state's business registry. The name of the registered agent, Martin O'Connell, was circled in red. The owner of Vertiscapes is a Mr. Martin O'Connell. As some of our longer-term residents may know, our board president's maiden name was Nancy O'Connell. Mr. O'Connell is her brother-in-law. A collective gasp went through the room. It was sharp and audible. Nancy's face had gone chalk white. Her cronies, Frank and Carol, looked horrified, staring down at the table as if hoping the floor would swallow them. This is no longer about my garden bed, Trevor said, his voice ringing with conviction. He looked directly at the homeowners. This is about a board president who appears to have manufactured a violation against a homeowner to create a pretext for awarding a no-bid contract to her own family, a contract to service an easement that doesn't even exist. This is about our money, and it's about the abuse of power. The timer flashed 00:10. He took a breath for his closing. And this isn't an isolated incident. This is a pattern. Just ask Mrs. Diaz, an elderly resident on a fixed income who is facing nearly $1,000 in fines because Nancy Drebach has decided her bird feeder is a violation. Yesterday, Miss Drebach offered to erase those fines in secret if I agreed to stay silent tonight. I refused. The timer hit Waiju and let out a soft beep. Trevor lowered the microphone. My time is up. Thank you. He walked back to his seat through a wall of stunned silence. For a full 5 seconds. Nobody moved. Then, the room erupted. The uproar was immediate and overwhelming. Voices rose from every corner of the room, angry, confused, and demanding answers. Mr. Gable was the first to gain his feet, his normally soft voice ringing with authority. Point of order. Madam President, he called out. I believe the evidence presented warrants a motion from the floor. Nancy, visibly shaken, banged her gavel weakly. "There are no motions on the floor. This is not on the agenda. I move for a vote of no confidence in the current board president, Nancy Drebach, and an immediate, independent forensic audit of the HOA's finances for the past 2 years," a woman from the back shouted. Seconded came a chorus of voices. "This is out of order," Nancy shrieked, her composure finally shattering. "You cannot do this." According to the bylaws, Article 3, Section 5, Mr. Gable recited from memory. A motion for the removal of a board member can be raised at the annual meeting by any member in good standing and passed by a simple majority vote of the homeowners present. All eyes turned to the other 2 board members. Carol looked at Nancy, then at the angry faces in the crowd, her expression one of pure terror. Frank, the quiet man, finally seemed to find his voice. I believe the motion is in order," he stammered. "We have to vote." Faced with an open rebellion from her own board and fearing their own legal exposure, Carol and Frank both abstained from the vote on Nancy's removal. The result was a landslide. The motion passed by a count of 58-1, with Nancy casting the sole dissenting vote. She was stripped of her presidency on the spot. A second vote immediately installed Frank as the interim president and authorized the independent audit. Nancy Drebach stood alone at the table, the architecture of her authority having dissolved in under 5 minutes. She gathered her purse and, without a word, stalked out of the community center, the angry glares of her neighbors following her every step. The very next day, the new interim board held an emergency meeting. Their first act was to formally rescind every fine and violation notice ever issued to Trevor Hanley. Their second was to do the same for Mrs. Diaz and a dozen other residents who came forward with stories of similar predatory fines. The contract with Vertiscapes LLC was immediately voided. A wave of relief washed over the community. The tyranny was over. The independent audit took 4 weeks, and its findings were more damning than anyone could have imagined. It turned out the Vertiscapes contract was just the tip of the iceberg. The audit revealed a systematic pattern of financial misconduct. Nancy had been using the HOA's debit card for personal expenses, gas for her Range Rover, designer yoga pants, expensive salon visits, and disguising them in the budget under vague categories like common area maintenance and administrative supplies. Even more shocking, she had set up a shell company under her maiden name. She was paying this company thousands of dollars a month for consulting services that were never rendered. The kickbacks she was getting were from herself, laundering the community's money directly into her own pocket. Her secret financial desperation had been the driving motive all along. The total amount of misappropriated funds was over $50,000. Armed with the audit report, the board turned the evidence over to the local police department. Criminal charges were filed. Nancy's downfall was complete. Her meticulously maintained facade of suburban respectability stripped away to reveal a desperate, common thief. 3 months later, at a special election to fill the vacant seats on the board, Juniper Crossings had a new energy. Homeowners were engaged, attending meetings, and asking questions. The community, once fractured by suspicion and fear, was beginning to heal. Trevor, now respected throughout the neighborhood as the man who had stood up to the bully, was nominated from the floor for a position on the board. He initially hesitated, but he knew he couldn't simply return to his quiet life. He had a responsibility to ensure this could never happen again. He accepted the nomination. Before the vote, he made one proposal. "I'd like to introduce a new bylaw," he said, addressing the crowded room. "A transparency bylaw. It will require that all board decisions, meeting minutes without redaction, and all signed contracts be published on a public community website within 48 hours. No more secret deals. No more hidden information. Everything out in the open. The proposal was met with a round of applause. Trevor was elected to the board in a unanimous vote. A week later, he stood on his back patio, looking at his small, thriving garden. The tomato plants were heavy with fruit, and the air smelled of basil and rosemary. The garden was no longer a symbol of defiance, but a symbol of peace, a peace that had been threatened, fought for, and won not with anger, but with facts. His life wasn't as quiet as it had once been, but it was something better. It was part of a community he had helped save, and that he was now committed to building. He had found his sanctuary after all.